Wow, what an incredible hour we just had with Dr. Ed Close. Now, let me share something with you with these physicists and all this other kind of stuff. Whenever I can reconcile any of these belief patterns to what the Bible says, I'm good. Now, when they start really transgressing the Word, and they start transgressing what the Bible says or transgressing Christianity or start putting down certain aspects of it, I don't deal with that real well because that's my belief paradigm. That's what I believe. That's what I've been taught. That's why I believe that, Jesus says that the universe, he holds everything together, which Dr. Close just said. So what we have to understand is this. We've got to be willing to make up our own minds and do our own deal with this thing and not just say, hey, wait a minute, I disagree with this or I don't disagree with this. You have to do the research. There's another really good video that was done. It's by Trey Smith. I promoted it before, and it's called The Theory of Everything, and he talks about the universal consciousness. He talks about the multi-dimensions, and Trey Smith wrote a really interesting book called Thieves, and how he it's a funny story. You got to read it yourself. And so that's why when we start talking about all these different types of aspects of what's going on and how the world works and these different levels of consciousness, right now I'm working on it. I'll have it for you next month. I've got a whole thing that we're going to do on the soul, on the human soul, and how it ties together with all of this consciousness and how it all works together and why in the end it said they will traffic in men's souls. I've done a lot of research on that. It was really good to hear that he said the consciousness and the soul are together. That's why I asked him that one question, but he really didn't have an idea of how to answer that one, which that was probably something I should not have asked him without giving him some prep time on it. But anyhow, so let's go ahead. Let's go to the next guest. Dr. David Steele, or Robert David Steele, is on. Robert David Steele is a former spy. I got to ask him about that. That sounds kind of cool. Honorary hacker, #1 Amazon reviewer for nonfiction, and a former presidential candidate for the Reform Party. He's a leading. For Reform Party is leading a growing movement to dismiss the two-party tyranny, which amen to that, and replace them with honestly elected citizens. Amen to that. Good luck with that. The Electoral Reform Act of 2015, first conceived in partnership with Occupy in 2011, is now ready for road test. His new book, Open Power, has been #1 in Civics at Amazon Kindle, and contains hundreds of links to book reviews, documents, and websites helpful to the citizen activist. Dr. Steele's new book on Open Power has been #1 in Kindle, and he is striving for nothing less than an independent president and flushing 20% of the Senate and House with independent members. Mr. Steele, so good to have you with me today. This is going to be an exciting hour. I mean, tell me about yourself. Tell me what you want us to do. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I appreciate this very much because I think your listeners are exactly the kind of people that need to rise up and bring integrity back to our government. We don't have integrity in our government today. We have a crooked, corrupt government that was described by Matt Taibbi in Griftopia as the merger of crime and politics. One small correction, I don't have a PhD. I'm overeducated, multiple master degrees, but no doctor, just plain old Robert will do. I think what people can do right now is realize, among other things, that electoral reform is 8 different things that have to happen together. I take issue with Peter Ackerman's excellent attempt to expand the debates, which were stolen from the League of Women Voters by the two-party tyranny. And I take issue with Lawrence Lessig, who's doing an excellent job.
Hang on a second. You got to give me some background. Why do you feel that it was stolen from the League of Women Voters on the debates? Go ahead. I don't understand what you mean by that.
All right. I'm absolutely happy to be interrupted. The League of Women Voters used to run the national debate process. Okay. And they were doing 2 things that drove the two-party tyranny crazy. The first is they were inviting independents and third and fourth parties to participate in those debates, which is the major program. And I can come back to this in a moment.
Yes, we're going to break. Thank you so much. My second guest is Robert David Steele. Do I call you Robert? Do I call you David? Do I call you Mr. Steele?
Robert. Okay. Always Robert.
Robert, give me a website. Give me that URL listing. Talk about your book at Amazon. Go ahead.
Well, the tiny URL for the electoral reform movement is tinyurl/open power as one word. Open power. That's where we take the power back.
Okay, and your Amazon book and how they get that?
Well, if you go to Amazon and you just look up Open Power Robert Steele, you'll get right to it. It's actually about two things. It's about the Electoral Reform Act of 2015, which I think we the people can, in fact, take the power back. We just have to use our power and come together. And it's about an open source activist toolkit, which I don't talk about much. That's mostly for coders and hackers.
Okay, now you were a spy. Tell me what kind of spy were you?
Well, I was a clandestine case officer. It was a great honor. I recommend the spy world to everybody just so that they can see the belly of the beast, if you will. I will tell you, it's a bureaucracy. It's not as exciting as you might think. It's 10% terror, 90% boredom, and the most important skill in spying, after listening, is typing.
What kind of spy were you, though? What did you do?
Well, I was overseas, and the primary responsibility for most American spies at the time was to chase Soviets and Chinese embassy officers, throw money and booze at them. Then I also was one of the first officers assigned terrorism as a full-time target in the 1980s. And so I will tell you very straightforward, I do not hold with torture. Torture gives you false responses. And I think we've lost our moral compass in spying. The drone assassinations are killing people with impunity, without due process, and they're 98% wrong.
Wow. Okay, I agree with everything you just said. That's interesting. Did you have diplomatic immunity in your passport?
Well, we're not allowed to tell you that, but it's a very intelligent question.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask you that is I have another friend of mine who has diplomatic immunity, and he's not really a spy, but he helps another government in the world to find people that have done wrong things and get them incarcerated, and so he kind of goes around doing all that. And he's a real good friend of mine, and maybe that's why he told me he had diplomatic immunity. Well, he said diplomatic immunity isn't really what you think it is. He said it's pretty much that you go through airport screening without being searched, but you still have to be cognizant of the laws of the land, and you have to do your best to obey them.
Well, the U.S. government likes to say that it does not have spies working out of embassies, so who am I to question the U.S. government telling us that?
All right, so tell me about the drone strikes. Tell me this too. You said you've been in the belly of the beast. I mean, how much of this is being controlled by that unseen government that we know about, the Rothschild banking cartel and all of their minions they put into these higher places? I mean, what's really going on with all that, Robert? Have you got any idea of that, or are you eligible?
Well, I have written a lot about that, and in fact, I curate over 80 editors at Phi Beta Iota, the public intelligence blog. That's the master blog. But if you use that tiny URL I gave you, you'll see it. You'll see the master blog there also.
So what is the master blog called?
Phi Beta Iota, like Phi Beta Kappa, but Iota for intelligence. Phi Beta Iota, the public intelligence blog. And I'm the number one Robert Steele on the planet. So if you just look up Robert David Steele, you'll get right to everything through Google, which, by the way, only processes 4% of the digital world. But coming back to this whole thing about spying, I actually believe in spying, but only when it's narrowly focused on really true threats to the nation, including, and this is the problem I have with the FBI, we are not doing good counterintelligence against the traitors that are running the U.S. government. We are allowing a variety of financial, religious, and ideological traitors, and I include Opus Dei and of course, the Mossad in this. And we're simply not cleaning house.
Wow. Okay. Well, when you throw Opus Dei and the Mossad in there, you're putting yourself out there by telling that, because that's you just nailed the truth pretty much on the head.
Well, I've given 8 of my 9 lives for my country, and I'm sure my wife would love to collect the life insurance. So come at me. I'll stand still for it.
Forgive me for laughing, but I know how you feel. I mean, because wow, I mean that's just. But tell me about the international banking cartel that's running the world and pulling the strings, and the international monetary funds, and how they're controlling countries and nationalities by the loaning of money and by all the credit extension they do. Well, I know you know about it.
Your listeners need to realize that merchants have always controlled governments. Governments have always been the puppets for the men who manage money. I actually have a post about 7 different CIAs, and when you think about how the world runs, you really need to think at 7 different levels. The topmost level is, yes, a handful of families, and most people don't realize that the Rothschilds are equally matched by some Asian primarily Chinese and Indonesian families that are every bit as wealthy as the Rothschilds. And in fact, this is the really important point. The financial elite have broken ranks. Lady Lynn Rothschild just funded a conference in Europe called Inclusive Capitalism. That's code for Stop the Pitchforks. And what is happening now is that a small segment of the financial elite is starting to realize that having achieved their goal of 100% corrupt U.S. government, not just the legislature and the executive, but also the judiciary, the Supreme Court is a national disgrace. They've achieved that. They've got 100% corrupt government, and it's not working because it's killing the golden goose, which is we the people who are productive. So at the highest level, people are starting to realize that integrity in an electoral process, integrity in a government is actually a monetizable factor. A corrupt government ends up eating itself from inside. It's a cancer. So I'm actually optimistic about the future, but I'm concerned that if we elect someone like Elizabeth Warren and we allow this two-party tyranny to continue for another 4 years, we're simply digging our grave deeper. Now, in 2015 is the time for we the people to rise, have an electoral reform summit, make a demand on the government, and then occupy the front lawns of every senator and congressman for the summer until they give us what we want, which is a restoration of an honest government.
Well, I couldn't have said that any better. That was very, very well said. So what you're saying is that the banking cartels have pretty much managed the money and the finances in the countries and the electoral officials for all of these centuries. However, they're finally beginning to realize that because it's become so corrupt now that they've destroyed the goose that lays the golden egg, and that they can no longer get productivity out of us, the slave class. And so now they're realizing they've got to return back to a normal government to give us some more freedoms, let us have our initiative to come back to actually do something.
They have actually been running a scam for centuries, and Mark Lewis wrote a wonderful book called Liar's Poker in the 1980s. And it's essentially how the stock market is a scam. Basically, they make their money on fraud. They make their money on the IPOs, on the the early public offerings. And then they dump the risk on the individual stockholder. And there's now a book called The End of Banking. And what it boils down to is if you count up the number of suicides across the banking community around the world, I mean, you could fill up several cemeteries. They are starting to realize that with the Internet and with the public starting to pay attention, the scam is over. The Ponzi scheme is gone. And now people are returning to community banking. Basically, I think banking ought to be a transaction where not only are you held accountable for being honest, but if you're dishonest, I know where you live.
Catherine Austin Fitz was former head of HUD. She has written extensively about this and has done extensive Internet articles and Internet videos about this. She said they've actually pumped and dumped and actually taken trillions and trillions of dollars out illegally.
Yes.
Are you familiar with any of that?
Well, I was recently interviewed by Max Kaiser, one of my favorite hosts, and we were talking about Greece. And what people don't realize is that this so-called debt that Ecuador and other countries owe to the banks is really just a debt of interest on top of interest on top of interest. The original loan was paid off decades ago. So I personally believe in a debt jubilee for countries as well as for individuals.
Well, that goes with the Old Testament, with the Torah. It says that every 7 years you had forgiveness of debts, and every 50 years everything returned back to its original place. But I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. If we don't get rid of this what I think Rolling Stone called it the vampire squid that's strangling the world, sucking it dry. It's not going to get any better. How do you suggest that we do that? I mean, we know that Obama's a figurehead. We know all of this. What do you think about Ted Cruz? I mean, now we know that his wife was one of the vice presidents at Goldman Sachs. I mean, what do you think? Is he legitimate at all?
I like to try and find the good in everybody, including Ted Cruz. But the bottom line is he's just playing for his 15 minutes in the sun. He's playing to have a little tiny bit of influence with whoever ends up being president. Now, you've asked me a very important question, which is what should we do now? My first graduate thesis was on predicting revolution, and one of the most popular charts on my website is a graphic that shows the preconditions of revolution that exist in the United States of America today. And it is sad, but that entire chart is almost all red. Every precondition of revolution, minus one or two, exists in the United States today. What we have not had is a precipitant like the Tunisian fruit seller. This government, this country, is, in my view, with the FEMA exercises in Texas, the FEMA death domes, and all this other stupid crap that the U.S. government does, I think we are very, very close to a boiling point. And the 2 cops that were killed in New York the other day, I wrote an article on that. I said the canary dies too. When people start shooting cops because they're wearing a uniform, we will be in a revolutionary state. And the FEMA exercise, what's it called here? The Jade Helm 15. That seems to be an exercise to test out what they tried to test in Boston, which is, can they control an entire state with federal forces? And I sure as hell hope that Texas says no.
Well, we talked about that earlier here on the Power Hour, on the first hour of the news, and I discussed the fact that, this was like a descent into tyranny. And if we allowed them to come into the states individually and start doing these drills with federal troops, which completely blows away posse comitatus, I mean,
yes.
Who's going to be, if we can't intervene on this, who do they want to be president next? Is it going to be Jeb Bush again? I mean, another Bush in the White House, another neo-Nazi? I mean, what are we doing with all this?
My dream is Jeb Bush against Hillary Clinton, because that allows us to elect Angus King as an independent.
We'll be right back from the break. Stay tuned for more of the Power Hour. Now, Robert, what was your website again? It's robertsteele.com?
RobertDavidSteele.com.
RobertDavidSteele.com. And let me ask you a question. A few moments ago, you were on the air talking. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here for a second because, I really don't know a lot about you, but you said you were praying. Does that mean that you're Christian? Does that mean you're Jewish? Does that mean you're a Hindu? You're a Buddhist? What are you?
Well, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I rejected that and became High Episcopal, my first marriage, and then Methodist in my second and final marriage. So I suppose I'm Methodist. I pray direct to God. I don't like intermediaries. I don't trust intermediaries. But I'm absolutely Christian, and to answer the unasked question, I think the United States of America should remain a Christian majority nation.
Wow, I'm sure everybody listening today probably feels the same way. So it's RobertDavidSteele.com, and there's a button there that people can donate some to your cause and what you're doing if they want to help promote it. Now, we were talking about the 8 factors associated with electoral reform. Right. Go ahead and tell me. We didn't quite finish. I think we had 3 left. What were the last 3?
We do have 3 left. The last 3 are paper ballots.
Okay.
If you can't vote on paper, visibly, transparently, and have that paper counted on site, you don't have an honest election. And there are multiple ways that fraud is committed. The Diebold machines can be programmed to actually give your vote to a pre-designated winner. You can also have the results of the machines completely thrown away and falsified in the electronic transfer from the local site to the statewide site. So bottom line is, paper ballots counted publicly are the only guarantee of honesty in an election. And then there's the instant runoff. There are a lot of people that would like to vote for libertarians or Greens or independents, but they're afraid that their vote won't count. So there are new ways of voting that eliminate this winner-take-all plurality voting. And instant runoff allows you to vote for people in the order that you prefer. And then whoever has the majority of votes across those preferences ends up being the winner. And I like that a lot. And last but not least, we have to understand that our legislators are voting for bills that they haven't written or read. The bills are being written by lobbyists, and they're being voted on because the two-party tyranny is selling the votes of our members in a block. Okay, so the highest bidder buys Congress, and we've got 42 specific billionaires that have been identified by name as buying Congress. So all 8 of those have to be implemented together, and I am as certain as I could be that we have the power to demand an Electoral Reform Act of 2015 in time to elect an independent coalition government in 2016, and in time to elect at least 20% of the Senate and the House as independents and libertarians and Greens and constitutions and reforms, so that we can basically trash the two-party tyranny.
Wow. Now, you also you said something that was very interesting, how they can be pre-decided on who's going to win what precincts. Is that why in the last governor or the last presidential election with Romney that there were areas in the country that had 100% voting compliance for Romney? In fact, even more people than were registered voted for Romney on these diebold machines, and how some precincts he received 0 votes in heavily Republican areas that actually had people that supported him?
Well, I think you bring up the really obvious fact that the entire system right now is Swiss cheese. It's dirty. It's crooked. It's fraud.
Now, one more question. A lot of people, and we've been talking about this. I interviewed a Jewish scholar, PhD, had Dr. Henry McCow on a show with Hagman and Hagman the other day. I've got to get you on that show too. And what was interesting about that particular interview was that he talked about how that we had the Kabbalist, Frankenists, Sabbatean splinter groups that were Satanists that were completely funding AIPAC and a lot of these other lobbying groups that were exhibiting undue influence in the American political scene. Do you agree with that?
I actually have read quite a bit about a segment of our elite, and I think it's very important that we understand that even the elites themselves are fragmented. I mean, you have a fraction of 1% of 1% at the very top, and the 1% is actually a very big number. But I believe that from the royal family in the United Kingdom, across the Rockefellers and Morgans and the elite families in the United States, you have a strain of Satanism and pedophilia, the abuse of children, as the privilege of the elite. And this is part of how they maintain discipline within their ranks.
Okay, wow. I didn't expect you to go there, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the one thing that nobody really wants to talk about. I've talked about it 100 times on this show.
Well,
that every time you dig to the bottom of this ditch and you get to the bottom of these players, it always ends up in Satanism, it always ends up in pedophilia, and it always ends up in human sacrifice. And why do they do this? They just think there's something that they think is good, or they're using this to try to control people. I mean, do you have any idea?
I honestly can't explain it myself because this is so far removed from anything that I would consider normal. But what I have been told, and there's actually a series of interviews with a Kay Griggs, who's the wife of a colonel who was part of this, part of the enforcement group within the Marine Corps.
I've watched your interviews.
What's that?
I've watched your interviews. They're excellent.
Okay, then you know what I'm talking about. And
but tell the listeners.
They engage in I can't even pronounce it. Sadomasochism. They engage in anal sex among men. They just do some really evil, ugly things, and it seems to be an initiation rite and a discipline rite. It's not something I'm familiar with personally, thank God. But I do believe that we need to do a much better job of counterintelligence among our own ranks and certainly into the elites. I mean, the Franklin scandal tells you all that this bad stuff is across the country. It's not just in New York and Washington.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, Kay Griggs, I tried to get her on the show, but she's fallen off the map. She pretty much exposed all of it. I mean, there was multiple-hour videos, and they've tried repeatedly to get her on the show, and we can't even find out how to get in touch with her anymore. Can you take some phone calls real quick, Rob? We got a full bank of calls.
I'll do anything you want.
All right, let's go ahead. Let's go to Gloria in New York. Gloria, you're on the air with Robert David Steele. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you. Robert, you were on Alex Jones, right, a few weeks ago?
Yes.
Oh, my God, you were absolutely stunning, amazing, exciting. The only problem I have is, what I like is that you don't hide anything. You know all the door. I love that. We need
I'm
that.
I'm Latino.
Yes, but listen, another thing is, the only problem I have is you don't have a P.O. box. Not all of us are online, so give us a post office box.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, you have to get one.
You know what? Bless you. I'm at 11005 Langton Arms Court, and I'll post my address today. I actually don't have a post box. 11005 Langton Arms Court, Oakton, Virginia, 22124. And I will post my address today. And so people who want to donate, donate. People who want to kill me, I'll sit still for it right here.
No, if we're not online, okay, 11005 Langton Arms Court. Go ahead.
Oakton, Virginia, 22124.
Oh, how do you spell that, Oakton?
Oakton.
Kton and, okay, VA and?
Oakton, Virginia 22124. And if you wanna send a check, make it out to Earth Intelligence Network, a nonprofit. I take no salary. I use every penny on the websites and the ink cartridges and gas.
Okay. God bless you. Keep fighting.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got to make sure that we promote people like Mr. Steele, guys. I mean, we've got to promote him. We've got to support him. We've got to donate to him. We've got to donate to his cause. We've got to give him a national platform in which to promote. I mean, anybody who's willing to talk about Satanism and pedophilia among the elite and what's going on with these guys and actually open it up and tell you the truth like he just did, that's pretty rare. I mean, I do it, Alex does it, and there are a few other people that do it. Everybody else wants to run away and pretend like that's not happening. Okay, let's go to Lauren in Ohio. Lauren in Ohio, you're on the air. Your question for Mr. Steele.
Hey, well, it's just a question, kind of a comment and blending together what you just talked about with close and changing the notion of people so that we can change this thing from the bottom up. The Bible says, come out of her, my people. The lie. That's the enemy. We've got to come out of that lie. And that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. I want to talk about the Bond versus United States Supreme Court decision, 529 U.S. 334-2000. The Supreme Court held that the American people are, in fact, sovereign and not the states or the government. The court went on to define that the local, state, and federal law enforcement officers were committing unlawful actions against the sovereign people by the enforcement of laws and are personally liable for their actions. We as the people have to start understanding that the Constitution as a body of negative law is to limit the maids and the butlers. It's not to limit the free kings. We are given freedom of choice and free will by God. And so when Ed Close was talking about you've got to understand the higher, the more dimensions, the God dimension, or you don't understand anything. This is where we can get them. And the other thing is just simple solutions. Obey God first. Keep your money in your pocket. If you don't owe taxes, don't pay them. That money is just the fruit of a man's labor, and if it's not the man's, then the man's.
Okay, Lauren, do you have any questions for Mr. Steele?
Well, yeah. What do you think of us just walking away when we just won't serve them? They cannot get the labor.
Well, all right. Let me address that because I actually was having this conversation with someone yesterday, and part of the problem is you cannot walk away unless you have a community that supports you, because walking away really means you still have to feed your family and clothe them and protect them. And I love my libertarians. I may be a libertarian myself, but the bottom line is individual freedom rests in community freedom. I personally believe that the state governors should be nullifying many federal regulations. They should be nullifying the federal presidents, and I think all of the states should take possession of all lands that are now illegally assigned to the federal government. The federal government is an administrative convenience, nothing more. It is not a sovereign over the states. We're called the United States of America for a reason.
We're not called the federal government of America, are we?
That's right.
Let's go ahead. Let's go to Janelle in California. Janelle in California, go ahead. You got a question or comment for Mr. Steele?
Yes, I have learned a lot about the Sabbatean strength is evil too. And I think, I'm sorry to hear you include Ted Cruz in that bunch of people.
I never did that. I just said his wife worked for Goldman Sachs. That's all I said.
No. The guest wanted to include Ted Cruz along with Cynthia McKinney, and that's two different birds.
Well, I'm a Noah's Ark. I'm a Noah's Ark kind of guy. Everybody has to be included.
Wait a minute. Let me make my point.
Go ahead.
Ted Cruz is an attack dog for Israel, and he's not even a natural-born citizen. I think this is another trick to damage and change the Constitution.
Well, I certainly agree with you that we need to absolutely flush the influence not only of Israel but of Saudi Arabia out of the U.S. government. There are only 6 million Jews in the United States, and most of them are loyal, law-abiding U.S. citizens. A handful of them are traitors. They support the Mossad, and they're called Sayonim. And an even smaller handful has top-secret security clearances, and they are allowed to make U.S. policy while still being citizens of Israel. All of that has got to get flushed.
Wow, I agree with you 100%. Okay, let's go to Renee in North Carolina. Renee in North Carolina, go ahead. You're on the air live. Go ahead.
I agree with the previous caller. The names McKinney and Cruz do not belong in the same sentence. Now, at number one at the top of my respect list are government whistleblowers, but at the bottom of my respect list are all those people who go along to get along. Look how many people it took to go along to help try to ruin your life, and that's happened to so many other thousands of people across this country. But I have issue with one thing you said, because I've noticed a pattern in alternative radio. You talked about the Mossad and the Catholics being the problem. Now, we've only had one Catholic president, and they blew his brains out all over his wife's skirt. And so the thing is, I find that when you look at the demographics, who has held the majority positions of power in this country, the thing is, the Mossad and the Catholics, any other little group you want to name could never have been a problem if the WASP, who controlled the majority of the positions of power, did not go along with them. But I find that they consistently blame everyone else, but they never, ever mention the part that the WASP had to have played into where we are today.
That's a very thoughtful comment that I agree with.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Steele. One more time. Would you agree with her?
Oh, absolutely. That's a very thoughtful, very, very thoughtful comment. This go along to get along is a curse. It's a cancer.
Go along to get along is a curse. You're absolutely right. Okay, let's go to Catherine in Tennessee. Catherine in Tennessee, you got a question for Mr. Steele.
I kind of came up with another idea that I thought might be a good idea for campaign reform, and I wonder what he thought of it. It's kind of a two-part thing where, first and foremost, no one else is allowed to put any money or any ads on television except the parties themselves. So that would do away with 501c3s. And the other part would be where all of the money that gets donated to the campaigns goes into one big pot, and then it gets dispersed equally amongst all parties who are running.
I think that's both of those are great ideas, but one of the things that I absolutely am strongly in favor of is an end to all third-party advertising. And basically, candidates must represent themselves and themselves alone. However, I also believe this electoral reform thing, there's a very important difference between what I'm trying to do and what other candidates are trying to do. My focus is on restoring integrity to the electoral process. And what that means is that we all need to set aside our particular ideological or financial views. The Greens have to come together with the Libertarians. The sane branches of the Republican and Democratic parties have to come together with the Independents. And we all have to agree on one thing and one thing only, which is restoring the integrity of the electoral process so that all of our voices will count afterwards. Right now, congressmen don't even read our emails and our letters. They don't care. Once we voted for them, they go and sell their votes, and what we think doesn't matter. So for me, the single most important thing we can do in 2015 is force the issue of who owns the government. It should be us. Right now, it's not.
Who owns the government? The big banks?
Well, part of the problem is that the government is millions of good people trapped in a bad system. Right now, the government is owned by 42 specific billionaires. Their names were listed in USA Today, and we can talk about that more in a minute.
All right, thanks so much. Right back in the next final break. Mr. Steele coming right up. You got a couple phone calls left? Give us a call. RobertDavidSteele.com. There's a donate button on that website, and I want you guys to give them $1, give them $5, give them $100. Do whatever you want to do. Mail it, go there and get the address off the website. Mail them a check if you'd like. Mr. Steele, one real quick question. We were talking about McKinney. She was the black lady who was grilling Bernanke about where all the money went with the Defense Department and all the underground bases and all the stuff that was going on. You said that you're not opposed to her. You said it takes a lot of people to row the boat. Let's go ahead and verify that, because a lot of people are going to misunderstand where you stood with her.
Well, I think what the misunderstanding was over Cruz. I mean, I would welcome Cruz as a politician, but I would not welcome him as a supporter of Israel, a blind supporter of Zionist Israel. McKinney, in fact, was not only grilling Rumsfeld about where the $2.3 trillion went in the Defense Department, but she's also, as am I, a strong supporter of Palestine. Gandhi said Palestine is to the Palestinians as France is to the French. The atrocities that we have funded with U.S. taxpayer money by the Zionist state of Israel are offensive, deeply offensive, should be considered a crime against humanity, and we need to stop that. McKinney is basically a good, decent woman of color who was a congresswoman from Georgia, and she's been a Green Party candidate for president, and I have total respect for her and what she's trying to do.
Excellent. Very well said. Deep underground military bases, what do you think the purpose is?
I wish I knew. I mean, my frightening worst-case scenario is that there's a segment of the elite that's stupid enough to think that they can go underground and gas us all and then come up and bury the bodies. But I really don't know. I think the most rational explanation is that it is the single most secretive program in the U.S. government, and it's a way to spend trillions and trillions of dollars without being held accountable.
Well, you know, Catherine Austin Fitts talks about the deep underground military bases and the tens of trillions of dollars have been put into black budget ops, and that no one knows where the money goes, and apparently it's all going into either the space program or the underground program, and they're keeping everybody, like, you know, just sitting back here on the planet, unbelievably stupid. Okay, we got a couple of minutes left. Let's go back to Annette, and we're going to take this to the top of the hour, Mr. Steele, so we're going to run out of time. We're going to take some more phone calls from Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele, thank you so much for being on with us today. Annette in West Virginia, quick comment from Mr. Steele.
Two comments. I believe the underground operations are dealing with the fact that the elite are expecting tremendous cataclysms in outer space, and they want to protect themselves in the not-too-distant future. And the second part is that the Bible delineates a literal satanic seed line, and there's a website. It's kingidentity.com.
Okay, thank you so much, Annette. Andrew in Missouri, your question for Mr. Steele.
How much do you know about the Knights of Malta?
Knights of Malta. What do you know about the Knights of Malta, Mr. Steele?
All I know is that Bill Casey was one of them, and they all have the Pope's direct phone number.
Wow. Okay, Jim in Michigan, you got a question? Okay, Rose in Virginia, do you have a question for Mr. Steele?
Yes, hi, Mr. Steele. I'm from Virginia. I'm so grateful. My husband, he's an awesome boy, and I'm
grateful. We're running out of time, Rose. Got a music playing. You got a quick question? Sorry,
no.
Rose. Mr. Steele, thank you so much for being on with me today. It's been a pleasure. Knights of Malta, another organization we need to do some more research on.